Welcome everyone to History Gone Wilder, part of Have History Will Travel. I am your host, the Wilder historian, Dr. Lucas Wilder, and I was scrolling through social media when something caught my attention. It was an online article entitled, "Did JEB Stuart's Vanity Spark the Gettysburg Campaign?" Anyone that watches the channel knows that I love to study Stuart. He seems to get a lot of criticism during the Gettysburg Campaign, and some of it is completely warranted. But I was having a hard time conceptualizing how his vanity could spark the Gettysburg Campaign. So that you can read the article yourself, I put the link in the description. The author of the piece is Robert Lee Hodge. You may know him as the man on the cover of the famous book Confederates in the Attic. In the article, he puts together some impressive primary source material, but I quickly found that the article was basically a plea to increase preservation of the site of the Battle of Brandy Station, which I'm completely for, but to try to drag Stuart's name through some mud to do it isn't the best way to do so. He emphasized that in early June 1863, as part of Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia was moving toward Pennsylvania on the Gettysburg Campaign, Confederate Major General JEB Stuart held a review of his entire cavalry, about 10,000 horsemen. Hodge cites a primary source that illustrates the strain such a force had on the landscape. The number of horses and mules in this army, including the cavalry, artillery, quartermaster's department, and field and staff, is not far from 35,000. To supply these horses with the usual rations of corn and hay would require 7,500 bushels, or 420,000 pounds of the former and 490,000 pounds of the latter per day. The labor and expense of supplying so large a quantity of forage are necessarily very heavy. Fortunately for us, as well as for the horses, neither army has occupied this part of the state since last fall, and consequently the supply of grass, clover, and timothy is abundant. Otherwise, it would be impossible to subsist so many animals with our limited wagon and railroad transportation, and at a time of so much scarcity as the present. You will be surprised to hear, therefore, that the horses receive no hay at all, and very seldom, and fodder, and only 1/3 the usual ration of corn, and yet I have never seen them in better condition. It is reported that the grazing in the counties between the Rappahannock and the Upper Potomac is equally as good as it is in this vicinity. Many of the farms have been abandoned and much of the fencing destroyed, but it is believed that the supply of grass, though not as abundant as in times of peace, is ample for our wants, should the army advance. The farmers are allowed 10 cents per day for the grazing of each horse, which would make the total cost of grazing 35,000 horses $3,500 per day. Hodge's title seems to infer that the amount of horses concentrated for the review resulted in Lee's army needing to push north for more supplies. However, he doesn't come out and say that, despite the inference. That inference, however, is misguided because the Gettysburg Campaign had already begun by the time that Stuart's review started on June 5th. Confederate troops had left their camp near Fredericksburg and began to pull away toward the Shenandoah Valley, which they used to invade Pennsylvania. Additionally, Mark Feige, a professor at Colorado State University, has tackled the topic of food and the Gettysburg Campaign. In his book, The Republic of Nature, he points out that Robert E. Lee's army needed food as well as horses, which was a huge motivating factor for Lee to launch the Gettysburg Campaign. So, Stuart concentrated his cavalry. For one, the campaign was starting, and he would need every man. And two, it wasn't his concentration of cavalry that put the strain on the resources that led Lee to invade Pennsylvania. That process had already begun. Now, I'm not saying that Stuart wasn't flamboyant. He most certainly was, and his grand review was a spectacle that the army could have done without, but it was in no way what led to the Gettysburg Campaign. The day after the grand review was the Battle of Brandy Station. The commander of the Union Army of the Potomac, Major General Joseph Hooker, got wind of Lee's army moving away from Fredericksburg and sent his cavalry in force to see what Lee was up to. Stuart's role, as seen in my video entitled The Genius of JEB Stuart, was to screen Lee's army, make sure that the Union cavalry couldn't pinpoint the location of Lee's army. The Battle of Brandy Station was a result of Stuart's force attempting to stop Union cavalry from finding Lee's position and keep them from finding out that Lee's army was dispersed. Stuart's grand review was a spectacular sight from the primary source accounts from the event. Hodge includes some great writings about it. It was an imposing sight. 144 companies passed in review in the most splendid order. I counted 26 stands of colors, exclusive of those belonging to Stuart's horse artillery. After the review, there was a sham fight in which the artillery fired over 160 rounds, and the cavalry made several brilliant charges. The horses were generally good, and everything indicated a good degree of discipline. Many ladies blooming in health and beauty were present. General Hood marched his whole division out to witness the review. A member of Hood's division wrote, "Yesterday we had a great review. Thousands of cavalry and infantry were upon the ground. The infantry rested on their arms, and the cavalry pranced and maneuvered over the field to the delight of about 500 young and thoughtless beauties. The cavalry looked fine with the prince of showy men at their head, dressed with gold and yellow trappings, glistening on the plain gray surface like fireflies on a darkening night. They were essentially a collection of pretty men, dressed in their best, while the poor, tattered, worn, and tired infantry received not one smile from the light-hearted beauties who were out on that day. The cavalry parade was a beautiful sight, but I have no patience for such tomfooleries." I'd like to do a video about Stuart's Grand Review in the future, but I wanted to take a moment to defend Stuart for this event. It was flamboyant and extravagant, but it did not, quote, spark the Gettysburg Campaign as the title of Hodges' article infers. For more videos on JEB Stuart, check out the videos here on the screen and search for them on my channel. Thank you all and have a great day.